I've asked Edgar to share his experience on the 8th and 9th step.
I'm Edgar. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Edgar.
I'm grateful to be here today. Blessed to have done this work out of the book with a loving God and a very patient sponsor. I have made all my amends, and I look to live the latter steps on a daily basis. And I also say sometimes moment to moment, because I found that life has a very unique sense of humor, and it can turn on a dime. And I've got to be in fit spiritual condition to meet those challenges when they get thrust upon me. So sometimes I do well with it, sometimes I don't do well with it. You know, the closer I stay to God, the better off my situation will result. The more I stay away from God, the more likely chaos will ensue. So I want to thank Matt for inviting me to be here today. I want to thank our greeter Marlene. I want to thank those that did the coffee, made the snacks, set up the room. You know, these are the key jobs that I remember doing when I first walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll tell you, Open AA saved my life. There's no doubt about it. When I got to AA, I was very arrogant. I was ego-inflated. I thought I was better than all of you. 1 second, just gotta stop my timer. I thought I was better than all of you. I thought I had all the answers. Not only had I gotten sober, but I was living a great life. I had a nice home, I had a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful kids. I had no troubles with the law, I had no hospitalizations. I had none of the things that I heard in Open AA at the beginning. I had none of those experiences. I had no one that I encountered when I was drinking was patting me on the back and saying, Ed, you might have a problem. There might be an issue here. Have you ever thought about stopping drinking? Have you ever thought about stopping for her? You know, none of that ever came to me or was never a part of my story. I spent years in therapy trying to find out the solution as to who I was and to what I was experiencing on the inside. I had a very big hole in my soul, if you would. I was very uncomfortable in my own skin. I lived in anger, I lived in anguish, I lived in misery, I marinated in self-pity. I was just a mess, just a complete mess. And what alcohol did for me is it took it away. I remember starting as a young kid. I won't get into a big drunkalog, but I'll just say this, that I started off early, and it continued to ensue over a period of years, where it got more, and more was never enough. I never became a daily drinker. I never had bottles around the house. I never had to wake up to a drink. I was more of a weekend warrior. For whatever reason, Wednesday, Thursday of the week came up, and a light switch went off, and I was off at the bars with my friends on Thursdays and drank like they did and they drank like I did, you know, through Sunday, and then ended up using Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as detox days. I thought my life was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. Don't get me wrong. I loved drinking. I loved the social aspect of it. I loved what it did for me. I loved that it gave me, you know, it made me, you know, better looking. It made me more sociable. I was more personable. I was more open. I was able to function in a way that I was never able to function just simply on my own. Never realizing the alcohol and drugs were just simply a symbol, as the book tells us. You know, that we had to get down to causes and effects. I thought I was doing that through therapy, looking back on it, but all I was doing in therapy was just bemoaning my existence, how everybody had wronged me, my life had thrown me, you know, God had shortchanged me, He hasn't given me everything that I want, and this is what I need, and this is what I need to get, and if I don't get this, then this is going to happen. It was just all a complete mess. In 2003, I was sitting in a therapist's office, and probably midway through the session, I don't know what we were talking about. We were probably talking about my escapades with the guys, you know, over the past weekend, and, you know, my drinking, and it had to be my drinking because he simply asked me a question. He said, have you ever thought about AA? And never had anybody talk to me about that. Again, I'm married. I've got 2 beautiful kids, a pretty good marriage at the time, eventually got rocky, and I was working in drug treatment at the time for about, I would say, 15 years at that time. Working with addicts, working with alcoholics, you know, working as a counselor, as a director of a treatment center. So I'd never seen that anything was a problem. And he asked me that question. I can't tell you what the conversation was that ensued, but all I know is I walked out of that room with a name and a phone number. The gentleman's name was Leo. I got into my car, I stepped into the driver's seat, closed the door, got on the phone, spoke with Leo for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and I was at my first AA meeting the next Saturday. God's grace had entered into my life. Simple as that. There was nothing else that I can point to. God had started to enter my life, and I went to that meeting. It was a group of men in Maine and Massachusetts. I lived in Pembroke at the time, so the drive was about an hour and 15 minutes. I would have never have thought that I would have taken that kind of a drive to get to an AA meeting, let alone my first one. But I got into that room and I was around a bunch of men who talked openly, honestly, lovingly, and in the midst of the meeting got into a pretty heated argument that made me very nervous. I'm not very good with confrontation. I'm not very good with physical violence. I'm not very good with people who get very aggressive. So I was very shaken at the time. You know, they were exchanging barbs back and forth from across the table, and it got very heated. You could sense the tension going on, and you could see the redness in both of their faces as they argued. And at the end of the meeting, they came around the table and they hugged each other, and I was just blown away. Blown away. How they could just find themselves again, loving each other, being able to be open and honest in that way, and knowing that they meant it out of love, and they meant it out of kindness, they meant it out of consideration. I spoke with the gentleman after the meeting. From that meeting, I went to other meetings on the South Shore in the Pembroke, Kingston, Marshfield, Plymouth area. The meeting that really stuck for me was the Kingston Early Bird Gratitude Group, which meets at from 7 to 8 every day of the week, every 365 days of the year. If you happen to be down in that area and you happen to attend that meeting, I will tell you that room was miraculous for me. It really held me. It really kept me. And that's where I started to hear others talk about their difficulties in life, their tragedies in life. And I had a very difficult time, as I mentioned earlier, relating to a lot of what was being said. It was probably, I don't know, a few months into, going to that meeting where I heard a gentleman speak up at the table just like this was. The room was set up just like this was, probably a much smaller room, obviously, a lot more intimate, if you would. And I remember him speaking my story, telling about how, he hadn't had any run-ins with the law, hadn't had any difficulties, in his life, no tragedies, no chaos, that he could speak of. He thought that he was living a great life. And he used a small 3-letter word, and he said, yet. And I immediately clicked in. I have yet to experience all that stuff. I have yet to experience all that chaos. I have yet to experience the hospitalizations, the run-ins with the law, the troubles that others, have experienced. I have a lot of yets in my story. Fortunately, by the grace of God, I was able to put down the drink on August 13, 2004, and I've been sober ever since. My sobriety date is October 23rd, 2004, because I had a little meet up with a couple of lines of cocaine. and I sat with it for about a couple of weeks, and I told my sponsor about it. He said, reset your sobriety date and just move on. So I did. I got to Big Book Step Study around 2012, 2013, and that's when the journey really began. I was a mess in early sobriety. There's a line in here that says, there's a paragraph in here that says, the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. That was me in sobriety, 9.5, 10 years. I got divorced, I left my children, I kept my job, that stayed, but my thinking was out of sorts in so many different ways. I was marinating in that misery that I talked about. I was marinating in that anger, that resentment. My defects of character blossomed to a degree that I never thought that it would blossom before. It had actually gotten to that point at the end of my drinking because the effects of my drinking on those defects of character, by keeping them anesthetized, if you would, kind of dormant, my defects of character eventually got to the point at the end of my drinking that it overcame my drinking. My drinking never had the effect that it ever did when I first started drinking. The effects started to wear off. My defects of character were far too strong. I wasn't living any kind of a solution then. I wasn't living any kind of solution in AA. I got a couple of sponsors. I did a couple of 4 steps. Those 4 steps were maybe 3 pages long, paragraph after paragraph of how you wronged me, how you were the problem. If you did only what I wanted you to do, I'd be fine. The troubles of the world was because everybody else didn't follow suit with what I thought was best. And that's what it was. There was a 5th step that took all of 15 minutes. My second 5th step was 15 minutes in my sponsor's car and in the parking lot of a Dunkin' Donuts. And for those of you that have been through this 4th step and been through this 5th step, you know that ain't no 5th step and that ain't no 4th step, okay? It just simply isn't, okay? So I got into Big Book Step Study, and I remember at a 2014 Big Book Step Study conference, a gentleman was speaking, and he used this phrase, and he said, bless you, and he said that this process starts with a beginning and starts with an end and ends with a beginning. And what he was reflecting on was the start of an end was steps 1 through 6, where we became powerless, we came to believe. We admitted we were powerless, we came to believe, we made a decision in 3, we revealed the truth in our 4th, we admitted the exact nature of our wrongs in our 5th, and we realized in 6th that we needed to end the person that we brought into this work. And then starting with and ending with the beginning, this process never ends, by the way, folks. I'm still working this program, I'm still living in 10 and 11, I'm still looking to carry this message to another alcoholic, I'm still practicing these principles in all our affairs. But ending meaning it ended the man that I was, and it started the beginning of the man that I needed to be, a man of God, a man of kindness, a man of love, a man of consideration. Love and tolerance is our code, living by that code. And that's what the latter steps reflect. And part of those latter steps are these 2 steps that we're speaking about today, steps 8 and 9. When I got to this part, I had a pretty significant list. I had a lot of people on my list. I had hundreds of names on my resentment list, and a lot of those people made it onto my amends list. And thank God for good sponsorship, because my sponsorship went through that entire amends list and said, nope, nope, nope. And what he was doing was he's wanted to make sure that I was making amends to people that I had harmed. Not simply people like the kid in my 7th grade class, okay, that I might not have been paying attention to, or I felt that they were, too much more smarter than me. I'm not looking to make an amends to them. These are people that I harmed, whether it be emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, however the case may be. I needed to be sure that I was digging deep and identifying the people that I had harmed. My list was still pretty significant at the time, and I was able to go through those amends. My first 3 amends were with my mother, my father, and my sister. My mother, she was unbelievable. We did it outside of a condo building. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. She's still living in Brooklyn. We went outside of her condo, sat across the street on a bench on a parkway while cars were driving by. It was a beautiful day, and I read my amends to her. Now, mind you, my sponsor had already read my amends, and he read every one of my amends, and I do the same with my sponsee in order to make sure that my amends are not selfish in any way. That they're not saying, I apologize for, I'm sorry for. That's not the intent of the amends. I was a serial apologist for many years, okay? I was really good at being able to say I'm sorry. I could turn on the waterworks like no other. Trying to gain the confidence back of the people around me and through my apologies. And I don't know that I ever truly made, any kind of significant amends, because I never amended my behavior. I never amended my conduct. I repeated those actions over and over and over again, and I destroyed relationships as a result. So he needed to be sure that when I was writing my amends, that I recognized the harm that I had caused others, and that I admitted that I had wronged them in some way. So when I read my amends to my mother, he also had me ask 2 questions at the end. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Is there anything that I've left out? And when I asked those 2 questions, my mother turned to me, like any good mother of her firstborn son, says, you were never like that. What are you talking about? You never did those things. And my sponsor also taught me that when you get to that point and when you ask those questions, just sit back and listen. Don't get into a debate. Don't get into an argument. Don't get into much of a discussion. Don't try to argue your point. Don't try and reemphasize what you've already said. Just simply let it be on the part of the person that you're sitting in front of. And she wouldn't let it go. She thought that I was the cream of the crop. I was number one. I was like, okay, Ma, is what it is, and we moved on. I did my second amends was with my dad, who lived in another country at the time. He's since passed the past year. He got sick at the end, and he was living in Chile. And I didn't know when I was going to see him or when he was going to be over here in the country. I knew I wasn't going to South America. I just knew I wasn't going to Chile. So we did it via Skype. So there are different mechanisms to do this. They talk in the book about writing a letter. They talk in the book about, graveside amends. You've heard those kinds of amends as well. But this one I did through Skype. Very emotional, very touching, very loving. He was able to forgive, I was able to forgive, and we were able to have a far better relationship between the two of us than we had in the past. My third amends with my sister. Okay. We did it on the shores of Lake Ontario. I went to drive to her house in Rochester. We sat on the beach. It was a fall morning. It was a little cold, but we sat on the beach anyway, and I made my amends. Tells me I got 5 minutes. I made my amends to her. I asked her those last two questions, and she let me have it. She let me have it. You weren't there for me. Where were you when I needed you as a kid? When I was having difficulty with Mom, you never intervened. You were always absent. You never stood up for me. Just volumes and volumes and volumes. And I'll tell you, the presence of God was there with me because I was able to just take it. I was able to just let her get it out of her. I was able to just let it go. I was just able to let her say her piece and not try and defend my actions, because at that point, after I revealed the truth in my fourth and I admitted the exact natures of my wrong in my fifth, and I turned it over in 6 and 7 to be a better man and a man of God, okay, I realized that I was blessed with the gift of awareness in this book, that her experience is her experience. And whatever she needs to go through, she needs to go through. And I'm in no position to argue my point. None. There is no position I'm in whatsoever to argue my point. Now they talk around here about, I'm sure you've heard people talk about having a spiritual experience in their third and having a spiritual experience in revealing the truth in their fourth. They have it in their fifth and what have you. I didn't have any of that. The fourth revealed the truth. I realized my defects of character. I admitted the exact nature of my wrongs to my sponsor, to God, and to myself. And I did all that work, and I realized and came to understand what 6 and 7 really meant, even though there were 2 small paragraphs. I understood that they were so crucial to my recovery, to my passage, if you would, from the man that I was to the man that I want to be moving forward, that I realized that I had that spiritual experience in my amends shortly after I had that amends with my sister. I got back to my car, and I still get chills every time I talk about it. There was a certain crispness to the air. Everything was quiet in my head. For the first time in my life, all that turmoil, all that angst, all the replaying of those movies, that resentment, that self-pity, just was gone. The colors looked a little bit brighter. The wind sounded a little bit more windier, if you would. Okay? It was a truly a God moment, a spiritual experience that I have yet to experience today. Sure, I have moments of peace and ease. I have, moments throughout the day on a daily basis. This program is only a daily reprieve. The program does not claim that we're going to attain absolute love, absolute unselfishness, honesty, purity. We're never going to get to that point. But these are principles of daily conduct. And how I go about my life is I live it in 10 and 11. And 10 and 11 remind me that there are still amends to make. Why? Because these defects of character are at my core. All I can do is allow them to lie dormant, and I have them lay dormant by prayer, by staying close to God, by conducting myself as a man who should conduct themselves as a man who's loving, who's kind, who's considerate, who's thoughtful, who's not wallowing in self-pity, who's not looking for things from others, who's living unselfishly. That's how I conduct myself on a daily basis. But amends still are part of my story, and I'm able to recognize those amends. I can't remember the last time I've made an amends, truly. You know, I might have slighted somebody at work or said something to somebody at work. I got that, a friend of mine calls it a whisper inside. You know, the whisper within. I have that whisper within, that when I say something to somebody and I get that little twang on the inside, right here, it happens right here. I don't know what it is, but it happens. That's God telling me, okay, you acted poorly here. You need to do something about it. The other part of the amends are financial amends, which I've made as a result of this work. I remember making amends by donating to charity because I had a little, I'm dating myself, but I had an iPod which I downloaded illegal music to. So I put a 99-cent value to each of the songs on the iPod, came up with 150 songs, so I donated $150 to charity because I wasn't about to give it over to Apple. It wasn't going to happen. So I made other financial amends. I didn't pay a registration fee for my son for Little League. One year, I made that financial amends. I made other financial amends. I had borrowed money from people that I never was able to pay, didn't pay back, and was not capable of paying back because they had passed on, or I just don't know where they were or how to find them. So I've made donations to charity. When I got to my sex part, a lot of the individuals on my sex list were also on my resentment list. I made no amends to those women on my sex list because I have no business knocking on a door 20 years later and bubbling all that stuff from 20 years ago to somebody who's now married with 3 beautiful children. I have no business knocking on their door. So how do I go about managing that part of it? I live by a certain sex ideal, which you guys covered a couple of weeks ago. I understand you shared on it, if I'm not mistaken. Your first time. Congratulations. It's a beautiful program. I'm a changed man as a result of this work. There's no doubt. The amends part of it is a big part of it for me. Was a big part of it for me. 10 and 11 it continues to be a big part for me. I work with 2 men now who are in the writing process, who keep telling me, who were like me, wondering when this was all going to end and when they were going to feel what they need to feel, and are they going to be ready for their amends, and are they going to be ready to deal with the sex conduct piece. And all I keep saying to them is just keep writing. Just keep writing. Just write. Just write, just write, just write. It all gets revealed, and it's been revealed to me. This program has given me a gift of awareness that I never had before. I know now who Ed is, and I know who Ed is in a relationship with God and the God of my understanding. I need to stay close to him. I fall off the beam sometimes, there's no doubt. I stray away from meetings. This is my first in-person meeting that I think I've spoken to in about a year or two, because I'm lost in the Zoom world. So I go to a lot of Zoom meetings. I go to one face-to-face meeting. It's not a big step study meeting. It's another fellowship. One face-to-face meeting with a men's group on Thursday nights. So this is my first in-person meeting in quite some time, and I'm forever blessed as a result of this work. If you're new here, if you're wondering what this is all about, if you just reach out to somebody that's done this work. If you're reading, keep reading. If you're writing, just keep writing. It does end. I promise you, it does end. If you've done this work, keep working those principles, keep carrying this message to another alcoholic. Keep conducting yourselves as children of God. And I'm forever grateful for this program. So that's it, and me. Thanks.